women's health needs innovation and creativity. It needs everybody to look at it in a new way.
There is a difference in the biology.
There is just this massive data gap when it comes to the female body.
It's not a women's health problem, it's a problem.
The immune responses are very, very different. In response to a pathogen threat, a male immune system will launch the Army. The female immune system will launch the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines.
This past June, WHAM hosted a celebration in D.C. for the 30th anniversary of the Revitalization Act of 1993.
30 years since women and people of color were finally included in NIH clinical trials.
I think it's time we do something. An anniversary should re-energize with a purpose.
3Not30. We don't want to have to wait 30 more years for many great things to happen.
Women's health research isn't just good science, it's a good investment.
We need to affect long-term change. We just can't invest blindly.
I'm going to be signing the presidential memorandum to establish the first ever White House initiative on women's health research.
Thank you, WHAM.
It's up to us, all women, to create the changes that we set forth today so that women and society flourish.
We can do this in 3 years. Let's not wait 30.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Carolee Lee, and I'm the founder and CEO of WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters, a nonprofit organization focused on the economic impact of accelerating funding for research and business investment in women's health. This will be our first of 5 dialogues that we will be hosting in WHAM's 3Not30 2024 series this year to share our objectives and strategy for achieving our 3Not30 goals. And they will include the expertise, knowledge, and passion with a focus on changing the status quo of women's health. This past June, WHAM convened leaders from across the ecosystem in recognition of the 30th anniversary of the NIH Revitalization Act of 1993, commemorating the landmark legislation that initiated the inclusion of women and minorities in clinical trials and research, but also emphasizing the ongoing imperative for progress in women's health. These preeminent thought leaders committed to driving significant, impactful, and sustainable change in the next 3 years and not waiting another 30, creating the imperative of change in 3Not30. Developed by these leaders during our June event, this initiative focuses on 3 ambitious goals: double the budget, improve diversity and access to clinical trials, and mine the data. These goals outline actionable steps to accelerate women's health research, innovation, and investment. Let's start first with double the NIH budget. That is that segment that reflects the 4 disease areas we studied in the WHAM report, focusing on diseases in which research is underfunded. That represents $350 million, which, when doubled, brings a return of $14 billion to our economy. And double the amount of investment from VCs and other sources of funding for women from 2% to 4%, channeling more resources into businesses focused on the health of women, unlocking the substantial untapped growth opportunities in diagnostics, treatments, and prevention for women's health. Secondly, we want to improve diversity and access to clinical trials. We need to increase diversity and equality in clinical trials by increasing the number of Black, Latina, and other underrepresented women participating in these trials. WHAM will support access to clinical trials and break down barriers, thereby enabling the enrollment of women and support our partners who are working to change this current dynamic. The third goal is mine the data, and we wish to create a WHAM accountability index to identify through all means those who meet and those who do not meet the criteria set by NIH to report analyses by sex. Data is key to WHAM, and we'll continue to drive and to create more data on women and be sure that we are reflecting the basic differences of sex as a biological variable. Today, you will hear experts share in a critical dialogue on these 3Not30 goals, how we will achieve them in our respective fields and across the ecosystem, and how we can support each other and amplify the results in order to create the kind of sustainable and dramatic change to improve the health and well-being of women, their families, and our society. Joining me today are exceptional leaders in their fields. Dr. Lori Frank, who just this week joined WHAM as president. I am delighted. Dr. Beth Garner, Chief Scientific Officer of Ferring Pharmaceuticals and past president of the American Medical Women's Association. Marcia Henderson, former Associate Commissioner for Women's Health at FDA. And Ramita Tandon, Chief Clinical Trials Officer at Walgreens, unfortunately just had travel complications and will not be joining us. But the good news is that we have had the pleasure of partnering with Ramita at past meetings and can share her vision in this dialogue. So with that said, I'd love to turn over to Lori Frank, who was the lead author on the WHAM report and who had a busy day. She just was presenting at NASM, if you want to mention a few words on that as well, Lori. So just delighted to be able to partner with you today and in the future.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, Carol. I appreciate it. So I can share that just today I was presenting to the committee that was formed here at National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine on women's health research, and look forward to sharing more from the 3Not30 goals that were discussed this morning as well.
I think that's fantastic, and I did listen to it, and it was an impressive group of dialogues that they hosted. So it would be wonderful if you could share some of the questions that when we initially approached you at RAND to develop this report, and we asked, what did we think would be the impact of doubling the budget as laid out by the report? And what is the impact of the WHAM report on the 3Not30 goals?
Terrific. Yeah, so happy to address this. First, let me give a bit of background about that WHAM report, which began when WHAM approached the RAND Corporation about addressing the question that you just laid out. What would the downstream socioeconomic impact be of increasing funding for women's health research? And we started with a focus on NIH specifically, but the microsimulation models that resulted are generalizable to multiple funders. And I was with the RAND Corporation when that work was completed back in 2019 when we got started on that. So I do have the insider's perspective of that. And what I would like to share is that we began with an examination across 4 pillar areas, beginning with brain health, heart health, cancer, and we also looked at immunologic disorders, autoimmune disorders. And within that, we worked together to identify good case studies. How could we best quantify the impact of an increased investment in women's health research? And what we landed on were 4 specific conditions or disease areas to follow up on with these microsimulation models. So the areas are coronary artery disease, rheumatoid arthritis, lung cancer, and Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, each of which is distinct from the other in some important ways in terms of when many people are diagnosed and what the life course implications are of it. So it really, together they make a great set of case studies to address this question about the impact of increasing funding for women's health research. And what I most want to share is how dramatic the results were. So at RAND, we were very conservative with the model. So we chose a very limited impact on downstream health outcomes. But even so, with very conservative assumptions, we found a return on investment for all of society of close to $900 million for Alzheimer's disease, $2 billion for coronary artery disease, and then for rheumatoid arthritis, upwards of $10 billion. So we're talking about substantial economic impact from what is a feasible increase in funding just at one major US funder. This was very influential for the 3Not30 goals. WHAM did convene a group of stakeholders from all across different sectors, as Carolee had mentioned, back in June to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the NIH Revitalization Act, and challenged everyone there to think, how can we make progress in 3 years and not 30? And based in part on the analyses out of that report, everyone agreed doubling the budget is an important starting point. And interestingly, a refinement that came out of those discussions was to look beyond public funders. So what about the private investment community? we all know that there's limited investment in women's health products, and femtech as a group probably attracts less than 1% of all health tech investments, according to some reports. So the group refined that particular goal about funding, and it opens up the possibility for public and private partnerships, which is very exciting. And then the report also has downstream implications for that second goal, opening up participation to be sure that we enrich our evidence base from clinical trial data. And I look forward to the other panelists' thoughts on that. And that third goal, for limited investment in secondary analyses, what could we yield in terms of increased knowledge? So all three goals have been affected and were influenced by that initial report.
So thank you for that, Lori. Obviously, the WHAM report has focused very much on the economic impacts, which has been a resounding, loud, let's make some noise, and we are doing that. How has the report brought attention to the disparities that exist in women's health, and how will it continue to impact this dialogue that's taking place? Because we started the reports in 2019 and we've disseminated them through 2021, and we do have one report left that we will probably disseminate early this year. Can you talk a little bit about that and the collection of future data and the importance that this will play?
Certainly. So one of the biggest sets of comments that I get is, I had no idea. How come I didn't know that the disparity was so great? And raising awareness, of course, is a chief goal of WHAM. And I think that the report has been influential in brightening the light in the room for everyone to really see just what the impact of this limited attention and this limited evidence base for more than half the population has meant for everyone. So that is an important aspect of the WHAM report, that the outcomes that were examined were for everyone in society. So productivity impacts, for example, if you're a caregiver of someone who is functionally dependent in different ways, that might limit your participation at your job, which has implications for the rest of your life in terms of earnings and later retirement. And who is this affecting? Again, the disparity is toward women as those who are disproportionately the caregivers and those for whom the financial impact is disproportionate. But again, it's an impact on everyone in society. So the other comment that I often get is, we need to know more. So the analyses were bounded around some specific parameters, and we looked at a specific funder. But what would we learn if we took a wider view, and what are the impacts across multiple sectors? Focus on the business community, for example. What's the financial impact that could accrue from this increased investment in women's health research?
Which is a project that we will be undertaking with one of our partners, KPMG, in the very near future, and we're very excited about that. There's a new initiative at the White House, and I'm going to put that out there early in the conversation because I think it's energized this conversation and created a larger amount of focus, as you're talking about, that we all need. How do you see data and the WHAM report driving that even more successfully throughout the country?
Yeah, so there's two main ways in which I feel like the data are driving activity that can be helpful for that White House initiative. One is just the filling that information vacuum altogether. We cannot make good decisions, strategic decisions about research investments or larger decisions about policy unless we have the right information. The report goes part of the way towards providing that information, but as I mentioned, it's pointing arrows in many other directions where more information is going to enhance decision-making and policy-making. But the other way in which I think it can be helpful is because I'm seeing a coalescence around the importance of including data on women in research studies. And the White House can help to galvanize the networks that are organically forming and that WHAM has played an important role in convening to really leverage that power towards the agenda and get everyone to move in the right direction and the same direction to meet the goals.
Well, you can imagine how excited I am to be able to partner with you and to continue to build the infrastructure of WHAM as we grow. And just a very big welcome. I know this is your fourth day, so I'm just thrilled to be able to work with you, Lori.
Likewise.
Thank you for those great comments. Beth, we're just so honored to have you here as well as a leader in the women's health space. And I wonder if you can share with us how can we use the data that we are accumulating to continue to advance women's health, both the data that we already have and future data. And also just piggybacking on that, how did the WHAM report establish the need for data and become a change agent and change the dialogue around women's health? So I'll start there.
Thank you so much, Carolee, and Lori, to you also. And indeed, data, that's everything, right? Critical to, I believe, to continuing to advance women's health, because really it's only with data, right, generated, first of all, in the female sex, analyzed by sex, reported by sex, will we be able really to understand the science, right? The science behind disease processes in women, which will then allow for us to develop treatments designed for women, right? And so this is why we've called it, as you said, mining the data, right, as one of the 3 goals. And indeed, like you said, also, it's not just mining data that already exists, but also we desperately, desperately need to generate and mine additional data, right, to provide scientists and developers the information they need to address the unmet needs in women's health. So just a few comments on that too. So I think we have 3-4 minutes maybe, but to just take you a little bit backward, right? And as to why this is so critical. So 2016, NIH enacted a mandate, right, to require grant applications for NIH funding, right, in vertebrates, so meaning animals and humans, to consider sex as a biological variable, right? SABV, as I'll call it. And this requires the consideration of both sexes in the design, the analysis, reporting of all preclinical and clinical research that's funded by the NIH. The good news, I think there is some good news, is that for NIH-sponsored research in humans, actually, women are now about 50% usually of participants in those trials. But where there's really a problem still in terms of enforcing these requirements is adherence in preclinical studies, right? That continues to be a huge problem. And what that means is, or what's happening is that in preclinical research, those studies continue to rely very heavily on male animals and sometimes completely omit reporting of the sex of animals in their studies, right? And this is so important, because if you think about the development of treatments, right? The basis of all research really towards therapies for diseases in humans starts with animals, right? It starts with animal models. And this is because most of the time, experiments that we need to be done, right, to understand mechanisms of disease require procedures, testing, things that, you really are very challenging to do and often impossible to do in humans, right? So these early experiments are so critical, because they give us the underlying scientific understanding. And it goes to without saying then that if you leave out females, we're only going to know sort of 50% of the story. And the other piece of this is the reporting, right? The reporting of data, which we've talked a lot about, right? We've heard a lot about from Janine at the NIH around the fact that even when studies are done, often the results, specifically results by sex, data looked at by sex, don't get into those publications. Why is that really important? Because scientists rely, right? They rely very heavily on published literature to guide their experiments, to build the body of evidence. And if you start with something that's only 50%, you end with something that's only 50%, right? And so we know, we see real world evidence, right? That drugs have been designed often only in men or in very few women. And then we find out after the drug is approved that it doesn't work for women quite in the same way. The dose is completely wrong. There's so many examples of this. So really that early experimentation, that early research is absolutely critical. And then the second part of your question is what has WHAM done to sort of bring attention to this? Unbelievable, like the data that WHAM has produced is incredible, right? Highlighting the fact that before 1993, most testing was done on men. 38% of animal studies that look at stroke used only 38% of animal studies looking at stroke used females, even though this condition is more common in women. 3/4 of the 5 million people suffering from Alzheimer's disease are women, yet only 66% of the animals used in neuroscience research are male. So, 60% are male. So a lot of shocking data that I think WHAM put out there, real numbers that people could really relate to and say, like, that's the result. That's why, Lori, as you said, people are like, I had no idea, right? But these numbers are so critical because it's really increasing attention to the issue. And I think, as you mentioned already, Carolee, the White House this has reached the White House, and I do believe it's largely because of the WHAM report, and then the proliferation of other things that have continued to come out, right? The Innovation Equity Forum that produced the Women's Health Innovation Opportunity Map. A lot of that is focused on sex differences. McKinsey put out a very recent report, in addition to their other report from 2020, a new report titled Closing Women's Health Gap. It's a 1 trillion opportunity, they're saying. And that was put out ahead of the recent World Economic Forum. And the first of the 4 primary areas that they identified is sex differences. So I believe a lot of this is starting from WHAM, and then all of the follow-on that has continued since then. So super exciting to me that we're there now, I believe, and people starting to understand the important need.
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments. And I totally agree with you. And we're excited that McKinsey has followed our lead and has issued a report. We think that's great. We hope others will as well, because it augments the conversation.
Yeah.
And we welcome many more to the same platform that we're on. So talk to us a little bit about the status, in your opinion, of diversity and access to clinical trials today. I'm going to probably ask Marcia a similar question, but I'd love to hear your views on that.
Sure, and so sad that gosh, I'm blanking on her name. Just couldn't join us. Ramita, thank you, because she truly is the expert here. But I will say, and I'm guessing that she would as well, that we are nowhere near to where we need to be when it comes to clinical trial diversity, right? So why is this so important? Well, first of all, patients, right, who are wanting to be in clinical trials expect to see practitioners, doctors, nurses, support staff in those trials. They expect to see people who look like them, right? And today that doesn't really exist. In addition, when you're developing products for certainly for women, but for women of color, for men of color, for anyone, you really need to be sure that in your trials, you study the population who's actually going to use whatever that product is once it's approved by the FDA, right? So, but what we continue to see is that we don't, see the diversity in the trials, and so we end up, again, kind of similar to my prior comments, we end up with products that maybe don't work as well in certain groups and so on. So we've not done that work during the clinical trials, which is where it should happen. In addition, there are tremendous barriers to participating in a clinical trial, right? There's travel costs, there's loss of wages, there's costs that parents have to, sort of figure out when it comes to childcare. And there's so many, barriers. Geography, also huge problem. And so, there's clearly so much work to be done. We may talk a little bit about trust later, but certainly trust is a huge problem. And we continue to see lack of trust in certain populations, individuals of color, individuals who, from a socioeconomic standpoint, are low socioeconomic. And so, and you throw those all together and you've got major issues when it comes to trust. So to point out though, what's interesting is that FDA has made it very clear that we must do better, right? They've put out a number of guidances over time that are very clear in terms of what the expectations are. And in fact, the FDA goes even beyond that and sort of has great suggestions about how to implement, right, clinical trial diversity. And yet somehow it's still not happening. So, but the work that Kavita's doing, I think, is amazing, because what they're doing at Walgreens is going out into the community, right? So they're going to address a lot of these problems that I just described. They're going to train investigators who look like, the folks in the community. They're going to reduce barriers to clinical trial participation, travel, cost, all that other stuff. And we're going to get the data that we need, right, that we should have prior to approval of a product, so that we can be sure that we are addressing the various needs of all the populations, in the country. So great work that's happening.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Beth. And yes, I agree. I think the work that Walgreens as a retailer is embarking on to reach the underserved communities where they have so many locations, and where the pharmacist is one of the trusted resources for that community, I think it's a brilliant strategy, one that we want to support. So, and with that, Marcia, let me segue to you, because I know we all of us actually have had a conversation with Ramita about this topic, and you, as a prominent leader in the women's health space and formerly at FDA and an essential member of our WHAM community, we know that much is being done to improve access and diversity in clinical trials. But talk to us a little bit how that's going to happen, in your opinion. Where are we today? And what do you think the impact of innovations such as Walgreens and other types of innovations will help us, and policies will help us to change the paradigm that exists today?
Well, thank you for this opportunity to be with WHAM. When I retired in 2019, we had established that women across the board coming through FDA approvals for drugs had reached 50% and above. And we worked on that for decades. And around 2016, 2017, it finally happened, and has been consistently that way. But it didn't happen by accident. It was a planned, structured focus on targeting the ecosystem, all of the key players, whether it was the researchers, the recruiters, women's groups, disease groups, health professionals. All of them were informed in such a way as to create the kind of process that would allow for change. However, I often said, well, who are the women? And when we looked at who these women were, they were disproportionately white women. And these are products, and I speak from a product perspective. I was not NIH. And I often like to distinguish pure research, evidence-based, of course, with applied research. Because whatever is done at NIH, and clearly more resources are preferred or helpful, they have to come through FDA to really be a product that's useful, that gets to communities, families, women and their families. And so with that said, we looked at who these women were, and they were not women of color. And FDA likes to say they're the global gold standard. They're the gold standard for the world. That's who's buying these products, women worldwide, domestically and worldwide. And the world is a world of color. That's the reality. And so here's a tremendous opportunity as you mine the data. One of the key issues around mining the data, we used to say at FDA, in God we trust, all others bring data. That is the way you make change, with the data. So that when you recognize that mortality and morbidity, these illnesses, particularly in these lifespan conditions, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune, Alzheimer's, and smoking are disproportionately affecting not just women, but also, of course, women of color, it is of huge value for drugstores such as Walgreens, trusted messengers that are already there, not just in urban areas or suburban areas, but in rural areas. It's a tremendous opportunity to expand the outreach. And as I've said, you have to plan your work and work your plan. So FDA, over the last number of years and in 2022, has required a diversity plan. The next step is accountability. What do you do? It's not just messaging. It's not just informing. It's not just mining the data. It's analyzing the data and applying the data in a way that's useful in a product category. So I think that that is where we are now, is the issue of accountability. And one of the things that we have witnessed is that we learn lessons from COVID, from the COVID vaccine, and we shouldn't lose those messages. Clinical trials were adapted to use of things like telephones, which women typically have in their pocket or purse. Clinical trials were allowed to be conducted not just at trial sites, but in communities. And drugstores are perfect places because year after year, the most trusted messenger around medications, for example, is the pharmacist. And they're there and they are trusted. And so I think that accountability is something that's very important. And so the WHAM reviews will be very important in providing feedback about not just who's doing poorly, but who's doing well. I always believe in showcasing success. So that's one of the values of the WHAM activities.
And Carolee, I just want to add to what Marcia said. I think it's so important about accountability. And what was fascinating to me was when those three initial 3Not30 goals were brought to this group of experts back in June, there were some refinements made. And one of those refinements was, in addition to mining the data, let's establish the WHAM Accountability Index. Let's actually set the metric. And I think of it as a nudge, as changing incentives to change behavior. And there are a few places where that nudge can be enacted. So one is with journal editors, which is where the discussion of that part of the 3Not30 goals landed. When we as researchers are submitting our work for publication in peer-reviewed journals, can those journal editors ask those questions about what sorts of comparisons are included in the work? Was the study powered to make comparisons and ask questions by sex and gender and age and race and ethnicity? So it's changing the force of history a little bit, how we've always done things, and adding in that layer of accountability, as Marcia said.
Yeah, no, I think I'm very excited about the WHAM Accountability Index because, like Marcia said, our goal is not to shame anyone who isn't following, but rather who's exemplary, who's really the leader, who's following the gold standard, who's really setting the paradigm here. And I think that deserves praise and it deserves awareness. There's a lot that we can do with that index that we haven't, as you know, Lori, we're just starting to formulate, but it is an exciting measurement of what can be done. Marcia, or actually Marcia, Lori, and Beth, you talked a little bit at the beginning about trust and the lack of trust in the Black communities. Can we stay on that for a moment?
Certainly this has been one of my themes for many, many years. I wasn't there 30 years ago, but I was there 28 years ago. And when I talk with groups, often researchers, trial conductors, I say to them, it is not Henrietta Lacks or Tuskegee, it is you. And they look up, it is you. When I walk in as a 74-year-old woman, which I am, and you say, Hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so, Marcia. I look at you with askance because you see, in communities that haven't been given the dignity of Mr. or Miss to be spoken to as if there's a hierarchy of you and me with my childhood first name, it sets a tone. If you say to me, "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. I'm glad to see you today," when your staff says, "Good morning, not have a seat," right? When you greet me as, "I'm so glad to see you this morning. Welcome." When there is a trust, that means I honor you. I honor your and respect that you are a decision maker, not the doctor. The first primary care professional is the patient. They provide the primary care. They make the decision about what they will do or won't do. And so I think it's very important to own that. And I often say, and I get a laugh, you don't have to be Black to take care of me. Anthony Fauci can take care of me any day of the week because he cares about my health. If you show me that you care about my health, that you care about me, then that establishes trust. And a lot of it starts with respect and courtesy, which is not something you have to pay more for. So when I talk to people, many times they'll say, no one ever asked me to be in a trial. No one ever really explained to me what a trial was. And I use the term study simply because it's something people understand. I want to study the evidence so that I can help make you and people like you better. I was sitting, and then I'll turn it over to someone else. I was at dinner the other day with a group of people, very highly educated and et cetera. And the trial issue came up just inadvertently. These were lawyers, by the way. And the woman next to me said, "I would never enter a clinical trial. Now, I would never do that." I said, "Why?" "Oh, no, I'm not going to do that unless I was dying." I said, "Well, there are all kinds. I'm in a trial." I tell everyone, one of the first things I do is I say, "I'm in a trial." And guess what? I don't do anything differently than what I would normally do. I am a person who is taking a known medication, and I'm being compared to someone who's taking a new medication. I've been taking it for years, and so I'm in a trial. It doesn't bother me at all, but it helps with information. And so, people don't understand there are a whole range of kinds of trials. There are a whole range of risks and a whole lot of benefits. And people don't understand that you may be the first to get a cure. You may be the first to get a preferred product. So you may also be someone that sets the tone for a whole group of others that you want to help. So I just never accept that you can't get people of color who are coming into drugstores every day picking up prescriptions so they understand the benefit of a product, that you can't get them to participate in the early stages. And also with the diversity plans and with all of the clinical trial applications, you're supposed to engage the end user. That's a requirement. And so I don't understand why some, and I have to give it to Dr. Garner, she has been in the forefront of leading very exceptional trials where they have had good numbers, great data for trials. If she can do it and others can do it, then others can certainly do it. And she may want to speak about what
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia, for that. Beth, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, Marcia's always full of wisdom. But thank you, Marcia, for what you just said around my work. And for sure, I agree with you. Absolutely. People of all colors and shapes and sizes can join clinical trials and will join clinical trials. if they believe in, what they're being asked to do, and if they have trust, right, in the people that are inviting them to participate in those trials. The work that Marcia's alluding to, I personally, and this was in a CMO role, a chief medical officer role, jumped in. I mean, I think I went into 30 states in 20 days to go into these, these investigator centers and talk about this and meet with the staff and tell, really sort of educate them on the trust issue and how important it is for people to understand sort of what it is we're asking them to do in the clinical trials. It is hard work. And I believe that's some of why it's just not happening. It's hard work, right? And it takes changing the way we do things. I'm talking more now really about the pharmaceutical industry. It really does take effort. It also takes some risk, right? Because think about this. If you have run a certain set of trials on a certain product, and then you're sort of going for the next, you're typically going to go back to the investigators that who are typically white, males often. Obviously, we're seeing more and more investigators of color, but mostly in urban areas, not in the suburbs, not in the the communities that we're talking about, those truly diverse communities. So it is improving, but that said, industry is used to going back to the folks that they trust because they know they're going to get good data. There's not going to be a problem, with the results that come in, and it's safe. It requires, and this back to the work that I had done as well. I actually trained people, new investigators of color who were in places where they could, much more easily recruit the patients that we were, needing to, enroll into our trial. Just to say a couple more words on the trust issue. Marcia hit it on the spot, which is, I think even practitioners tend to sort of say, well, it's not me. I mean, this is all stuff that happened a long time ago, Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, et cetera. And I think your point, Marcia, around the fact that it is not that. It's the continued sexism, racism, unconscious, and more importantly, conscious bias that confirms when people of color come to the doctor's office or to think about a trial, that confirms they shouldn't trust the doctors and the staff, right? These behaviors continue. And so until we improve there, we're not going to just sort of magically see, right, improvement in trust. And we have some really, scary, very, very recent examples of this, right? We remember the physician who died of COVID in the hospital, having told her nurses and doctors that something wasn't right. She died. She was a physician. So this is not just an issue of folks who are low income or not educated and so on. These are issues that all folks of color deal with, regardless of sort of where they stand, in the ecosystem. We have the recent death of a very, 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 very famous sprinter who died of preeclampsia. Yeah. Why did she die at home of preeclampsia? She told her agent that she didn't trust the hospital. I'm not going there. I'll be better at home. So these are ongoing issues, and it's
Serena Williams.
Serena, she wasn't even listened to, right? Dismissal. It's dismissal. Yes, so that's the other word I should have used as well, Marcia. You're absolutely right. So a lot of work to do is the bottom line.
So I have some questions then for both Beth and Marcia about structural barriers. So Marcia, I think you made an excellent point about trust at the individual level, as well as at the broader level for community. And decentralized trials, like in retail pharmacy, can be one way to bridge that gap towards trust at both the individual and the community level. But I'm really interested in understanding what you see as ongoing barriers between the trialists and those who are looking to expand access and the communities that they're trying to reach. So do you have thoughts on how best to bridge that gap, and where would the decentralized trial model fit in?
Well, I have two major thoughts. One, even though my office, the then the Office of Women's Health at FDA was trying desperately to increase the percentages of women in trials, it didn't occur to us to go to the people that do the recruiting as an association. And so there's an association of clinical research professionals. And guess what? They're mostly nurses and they're mostly women. And when I went there to speak, I can't tell you how many came up to me and said, I didn't know there were fewer women, although I have to admit, most of the people I recruit are men. Well, hello, you're a woman and you now know, and guess what you can do? You can do more, invest more in this. Then there's the Society of Clinical Research Associates, and those are CROs and executives. And I used to take to them their report card. I would show them, this is what's happening. And they would claim they didn't know. But I have to say, we hadn't reached out to them. And these are people that are making decisions about recruitment, specifically about recruitment.
Yeah, excellent point. So it's that bridging that communication and awareness gap.
At all levels, at
yeah.
all, like you said, the individual level, but those who are actually doing recruitment,
Right.
there are opportunities there to kind of break down some of that.
Well, there's a question. I'm sorry, there's a question that has come in, and I think I'd like to ask it now and then move on from this, which is, how can I find clinical trials?
Clinicaltrials.gov.
Right. That's what I was going to mention as well.
Yeah, you won't mention, but every approved trial in this country is to be listed literally on clinicaltrials.gov. You can search for it by disease or condition. You can search for it by geography. It will show you eligibility. It will show you if it's people are being actively recruited. It can be very informative. And of course, your healthcare provider can help you also with that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'd love to switch gears just a little bit and ask, we believe strongly, as we did on June 13th, in bringing different members from different parts of the ecosystem, which has to do both not only with research, advocacy, business, the VC community, the financial communities, and whatever I might have left out. But who needs to come to the table, in each of your opinions, to get some of this moving at a much faster rate in 3Not30? Lori, do we want to start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what's so exciting about this conversation for me is hearing the promise of public-private partnerships. So the outreach to communities around Goal 2, expand access and expand representation in trials, is something that's applicable not just to publicly funded research funded by large funders like NIH or PCORI, but also to drug and device developers. And where's the learning that can take place to make this all more efficient? There's already excellent initiatives out of NIH, for instance, all of us out in the community. I like to cite colleagues from National Institute on Aging with excellent outreach initiatives for older adults in clinical trials. So how can we bridge that gap and communicate across these sectors? I feel like that has been one of the strengths of WHAM, is bringing together these different sector representatives so that there can be that crosstalk and that cross-learning.
Yeah, thank you. Beth, do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely, and I fully agree. There's a talk I've actually been putting together around this that I sort of describe as the need. It's not a magical name for it. It's just basically the need for the full ecosystem, right, from start to finish, to come together, right? And WHAM is absolutely helping with this, right? You bring, when you have your meetings, your conferences, you bring people from all of the various aspects, right, of health. So public-private partnerships for sure. Industry needs to be deeply involved in this. Payers need to be deeply involved as well. Regulators need to be involved. Advocacy is key, right? If I think about sort of through my years in industry, the advocacy piece of it has been critical on just so many levels. And advocacy is how you get to really understand sort of the patient journey and what do they actually need, right? So that's critical as well. And so for me, it's really bringing together the full ecosystem and, just working this out. It's a lot of work. It's tough to do, but I think until we make sure that we have all of the various players, we won't be able to get where we need to.
I want to go back to the data though, around goal 3.
Sure.
Mine the data. There's a lot we have already collected, a lot of resources already invested, and for a relatively small incremental investment, secondary analyses where power considerations allow to generate more information across a range of variables, asking questions that people have not yet asked. And I'm highlighting that because that's applicable not just to academic researchers and clinicians, but all across this ecosystem, as you say, including the VC community and private investment. There's information out there that needs to be harvested. And to me, that's part of the beauty of goal 3.
Totally agree with you on that, Lori.
I would add to that. I am anxious and anticipating good things from the White House. Yes. Because they have the ultimate ability to issue a clarion call about this. They have the ability to, one, inform, to use their executive authority, and help to bridge the gap for these public-private partnerships. And, there is no, and they have the ability to do it now, and they say they're going to do it now. So I am hopeful that the WHAM community and the White House will be able to really kickstart something really new and exciting with the report and the data that have already been collected to form some new arrangement that can move us quickly in new directions.
There's a question that I'd like to ask you, which is on this subject, which is, would WHAM be interested in validating randomized clinical trial designs that do more to account for individual differences?
Excellent question. So that is turning up the volume on the data, and that is with an incremental adjustment to work already underway. So it's leveraging investments in the right direction. So absolutely, and I think that's consistent with goal 3. What could we learn by just adjusting the way in which we approach our own hypothesis generation and our analysis plans? And that gets to issues of power, N, and recruitment. So that really runs across all 3 of the 3Not30 goals.
Absolutely. So, and just back to Marcia's comment, we're energized, obviously, as is everyone, and motivated by the White House initiative, and have had conversations with Dr. Carolyn Missouri, who we've known from the beginning of WHAM, as well as with the Gender Policy Council, and have made several recommendations on how we think we can be helpful. And we are excited. There's not obviously a huge amount of time to get a lot of information out and a lot of action in place, but I know that the White House and Carolyn and her team are working feverishly on some of the implementation. Lori mentioned private-public partnerships. We're also interested in PPAPs, private-public academic partnerships. And so I think exploring all of these ways of bringing different parts of the ecosystem together is a necessary and critical element to success in having even 3Not30 achieve its goals. So with that, we're going to run. Sorry, go ahead, Marcia.
I was just going to say that many things can be done where it won't even cost any more money. And it's my hope that when I say inform and use executive authority and create public partnerships, that the White House would do things like, as you say, women don't know these things. Women don't know the #1 killer of women is
Yes.
lung cancer and not breast and ovarian. The White
Yes.
House can request internally through their agencies a report that shows the gaps that they should be filling and report an action plan for that. That wouldn't cost any more money. And that is something that is way overdue.
So let's just end with a question that each of you can answer, which is what 3Not30 is now embarking. Obviously, we started on June 13th, so we're 6 months into this process. Lori, let's start with you. Now that obviously you're part of the team, how excited are you by this initiative? What is it that you feel will drive it more successfully? And what other help do you think WHAM needs to make sure that we achieve our goals?
Sure. So I'm going to answer that with one word, but then I'll elaborate. So the one word is networks. As I mentioned, I feel that WHAM has been really instrumental in connecting across sectors that need to be speaking to each other for efficiency, but also we all have this sense of urgency right now. There's a window of opportunity right now, a lot of attention for good reason on the value of women's health research. So the time is right, and it's about the connections. And I think the 3Not30 goals provide an excellent framework for multiple groups to join forces and network in order to move that ball forward.
Yeah, well, we're excited about doing it with you. Beth, do you want to opine on that?
Absolutely. And as you, I think, know, Carolee, I'm super excited about this. I've been in this space for a very long time and been very frustrated over time that, like, when are we going to actually take this seriously? And it does feel like Lori said that this is the time. It feels like it, right? And it's not that, like, this has been ignored over the decades. I want to be clear, but there is a certain sort of increase, right, in the noise and in the interest at this time. I agree also with what Lori said around continuing to build the network. It's all about networking. Everything is, right? But this here is absolutely critical. And to ensure, like I was saying earlier, that we've somehow managed to get all of the stakeholders in a room over and over again to just talk through this stuff, because it's very, very challenging, right? And it's easy to sort of feel like, oh, we're going to get this done. No, but this is going to take ongoing feet to the fire for everyone. And so what I would encourage WHAM to also do beyond sort of building the network is just keep the cadence going, keep the noise going. So that's critical. I worry, I'm a worry wart a little bit, and I worry about the missing this opportunity. So again, I think we need to just keep that fire going, while we have this opportunity.
Well, that we'll do that with you, and we so much appreciate your participation, your support, your enthusiasm. Marcia, a final word on that one?
When I was at FDA, I led a report called Powered by Partnerships. So I believe in the power of the network and the partnerships. However, we must tell our partners, we must engage them in specific action steps. It does not do you any good to have an enthusiastic group unless they have tasks. So I think part of what WHAM's focus in the future is to learn from our partners what steps they can do and commit to, so that in 3 years from now, we will see some outcomes.
You're terrific, and I so appreciate that. So let me finalize some of the comments and ask, why is 3Not30 our call to action? And it's because we believe that collectively we have the economic power to create change. And it's because we recognize that women drive the economy. In the US, we make up more than 50% of the workforce, 52% of the population, control over 60% of the wealth in the country, and we're responsible for 85% of consumer spending. And most importantly, we make over 80% of healthcare decisions. So let's create the changes we set forth today so that women in society flourish in the next 3 years and not 30. And for more information about WHAM, you can visit whamnow.org. And you can also join 3Not30 initiative, which we're putting in the link in the chat. And you can also follow us on social media, which we adore. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you for our incredible panel. You're all just such great friends at this point and mean so much to me and to WHAM. And I look forward to seeing all of you at our next dialogue in the series, which will be on February 15th. And we'll focus on women's heart health and how we're going to make changes in that area in 3 years, not 30, to impact the health and lives of women. Great to have you all participate with us today. And thank you so much for your support and interest in WHAM.